Tim, today you are bringing us a handbook, a practical guide to managing invasive alien plants, a handbook co-written by Chris Martins, who we'll get on the line shortly. But the practice, the need to manage invasive alien plants is one that we talk about a hang of a lot and keep coming back to in our conversations.
Yeah, and I'm not too sure if we really have got a good handle on why we sort of, do manage, or why we have alien plants, or why they're declared aliens. And I thought maybe Chris can unpack that for us as well this morning. And, a lot of it goes back to, as you say, there's always a little twist to the tale. Some of the mirth of working in KwaZulu-Natal and going out and watching one of the guys who was working on the Working for Water project, lovingly tendering his alien lantana hedge. And it always kind of sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
And we get quite sort of concerned about it, and we look at our own gardens. We wonder, well, how many category 1s and whatever have we got in our own garden? And we have things from our municipalities that tell us we have to do this and we have to clean up the aliens. And I just hope that they're listening this morning, because maybe they could take a look at the book and get rid of some bugweed and lantana in my area. And why do we bother it? How does it spread? How does it even get here, half of this stuff?
Okay, well, with that, we know that, of course, managing invasive alien plants helps to prevent a lot of negative impacts, water, or the usage or of too much water or water resources is one of those. And of course, landowners are required by law to take the necessary steps to control and eradicate alien land on their plants. But how to do so and do so effectively? Chris Martins is co-author of The Practical Guide to Managing Invasive Alien Plants. It's a handbook that you can buy for yourself and just utilize in your everyday life. And of course, Chris Martins is also a member of the fynbos Trust. Chris, thank you so much for your time this morning. Welcome to Weekend Breakfast.
Good morning. Good morning to your listeners.
A pleasure to have you on, Chris. Could you run us through and just discuss the the core principles of alien plant clearing, and what went into putting together this handbook? What were you seeing that we lacked as a country?
Well, the alien plants have been in South Africa for a very long time, probably since the turn of last century. Where they were introduced for various reasons, mostly for some of them for forestry, others for reclamation of drift sands and dunes. Others were garden plants that had escaped. So there's several reasons why we have alien plants in the country at the moment.
Yes.
But the critical issue is that unless because they're actually adapted for certain environments. On their introduction into South Africa, in the case of the fynbos, for example, which happens to be a treeless biome or natural system, there's this gap open that allows that plant to thrive, given its natural growth strategies and so on. So as a result, we have this range, a large number of alien plants, large number of alien organisms, in fact, some of which are plants, which are invasive in our country. And that raises a whole lot of other issues, one of which you've already mentioned is the rate at which these alien plants actually capture and use water, rendering that water not available for the natural environment and us that live alongside or within the natural environment.
Yeah.
The other real threat that aliens provide is to the biodiversity. There are large tracts of South Africa that are invaded, huge dense invasions, which then basically push out or threaten and smother the natural habitat and everything that goes with it, effectively removing that natural habitat from use in the landscape. So, our landscape's connected across, there's systems that are connected across the landscape, and the natural environment is really important in providing this platform for us as human beings to survive and work and live in this landscape.
Absolutely.
So the aliens, therefore, are a threat to us as human beings in the landscape.
Yeah.
And a example of that is the way in which alien plants change the fuel structure and makeup of flammable material in the landscape, and then renders fire a huge threat to infrastructure and people, as to the biodiversity of that environment, by changing fire regimes so that fires behave in a way which is not natural, and then also as an indirect consequence to the aliens threatens the biodiversity.
Sure.
So, and that's only a few of the reasons. There are others as well.
Yeah, a lot happening there. But yeah, a lot happening there. But those reasons that you've already set out for us are incredibly compelling. I must hasten to add, before I let Tim jump in, that of course this practical guide to managing invasive alien plants is a handbook for land users in the Cape Floral region. I did mention that you're of course part or a member of the fynbos Trust. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, with it being the Cape area is not really the issue, much of an issue either, because it is adaptable to everywhere.
Sure.
Chris, do we use water as a fair excuse? And I'm saying that is in inverted commas. And the reason I'm asking that is that we're pretty bad in South Africa in the way that we treat rivers, watersheds, etc. And the take-up of water, the fact that they are transpiring, etc. Are we using water as a simple excuse that people can really get a handle on? And is it more around the biodiversity?
No, I think the two go hand in hand. Biodiversity, the natural biodiversity, is the most effective water factory in our country. So if we threaten the biodiversity, we also threaten the water. And the fact that the trees themselves, or the alien plants themselves, also capture and transpire water out of the system, that does make water a good surrogate for a whole suite of threats to us as human beings living and working in the landscape.
But the pioneer plants, the fact that a lot of these appear to come in as pioneer plants where we've degraded the landscape, how do we turn that around?
Yeah, I think it's about correct land use practice in the first place. Understanding how your systems work where you live and work, and to try and limit the effect of whatever we're doing there to the point where we don't create the space for these invasive species to move in and start costing us huge amounts of money economically, start threatening our biodiversity and threatening infrastructure and our investments that we're making in the landscape.
I guess a lot of our areas, you are looking and talking more about the wilderness or the sort of the more natural areas, not our residential gardens and what have you. But yet places like Johannesburg, I'm not too sure about Cape Town, but Joburg, Pretoria, there are wonderful repositories for seed beds, etc., of alien invaders. We see them everywhere in these towns. What sort of programs are there countrywide to start eradicating these out of the country, or start managing them, let alone eradicating them?
Yeah, I mean, the most famous, of course, being the Work for Water program. And you're absolutely right. The large cities, and all of those cities, have strategies in place to manage and limit the impact of aliens. But you're quite right. Those sources of invasion are a threat, and definitely need some kind of international support, and that's where the amazing work done by the Work for Water program over the last, it's 25 years now or something, under the guidance of Dr. Guy Preston and various others, they've been a huge factor in trying to provide a national strategy and feed into the national legislation. That's why this list of plants is in place, and it's taken 20 years of really hard work to get those into legislation, to get them recognized as threats, and to get strategies and resources in place to actually deal with them. So there is a national program, but by their own admission, they still feel that is inadequate to deal with the extent of the problem. And it's to leverage investment by private and corporate landowners to effectively direct resources towards dealing with this problem in an efficient and a suitable or appropriate way. So to answer your question about the pioneers, really the invaders are using that space. They're adapted to grow and thrive in the space that we create by disturbance or by changing our environment. So I'm not for one second saying we must stop living and working in the landscape. We just have to do it a little bit more sensitively. And the other big player in this process is, of course, climate change.
Sure.
We need to understand what is likely to happen and the impacts of aliens on an environment changed by a changing climate.
Chris, part of the or an intention of yours and the co-author of your book, Guy Deacon and Dean Ferreira, is to keep on updating the necessary sections of this handbook, right, annually. And I'm keen to find out what the fundamental tenets of this handbook are. You say that you're giving land users an overview of how to approach an invasive alien plant management program. What does that fundamentally look like, or what are the basics of that you firmly say this is what works?
I think one of the clear feedback you'll get from the Working for Water programs people is that planning where you work and how you work is probably the first and most important thing in setting up a program. So you need to understand the dynamics of the species that are invading and the biodiversity in which those invaders are finding themselves. And in that way, you can actually make sure that resources are spent appropriately and effectively. So the planning process prior to spending money, it's one of those cases where, because of the nature of clearing aliens, there's so many interrelated issues that once you get on the treadmill, or once you clear a certain portion of alien invaded area, you basically get on the treadmill, because that's not the end.
Yeah.
That's actually only the beginning. And it could take up to 7 or 8 treatments thereafter to effectively get that alien population into a maintenance phase. We're very careful to not use the word clear. In fact, we need to treat.
Sure.
Clear aliens is actually a very wishful thing, because 9 times out of 10, once they're there, some of those seed beds that come with the aliens can be in the system for up to 100 years. We know that certain species of Australian acacias, their seeds remain viable for up to 100 years. So we really do have to stop them spreading, number one. So where you've got clear areas, keep them clear. But once you start the process, be sure that you can chew what you've bitten off. Just to use another euphemism.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Tim.
Sorry. So just to complete, it's not only the planning. There's things like the restoration process or the rehabilitation process after a clearing effort. And again, the two are linked. The planning and the restoration part are linked, where restoration should be part of the plan when you start, not an afterthought, because then that gets expensive. And then there are all the other requirements that landowners may have in terms of safe environments for workers and safe working conditions with correct and appropriate equipment, etc., etc. So the manual focuses on that, and is effectively we've tried to keep it quite slim with a very detailed set of links and appendices where the bulk of the detail work that somebody actually picking up a saw and going to do the work would be able to use that. So the land users have this guide which gives you access to a range of other much more detailed information.
Because I read a very interesting article the other day on using goats as management tools. Do we do that in South Africa at all?
I have done it myself personally, but way back in the 80s, in KZN, in fact. But it was experimental at that stage, and yes, it is a viable option. But obviously needs to be related to the specific alien, the environment that alien is in, and the kind of management the goats are being exposed to. So the normal way is to push them into a light to medium invaded area, fence it off in some way or another, either with electric fencing or other, and let them browse off the alien material that's there, to the extent where you can come in later and treat it with another treatment, or where the goats are actually effectively choosing to eat the aliens. There is a point somewhere where goats will not be the only way to be able to clear that alien. You'll generally need to use other methods with the goats as well, but they certainly, and other browsers can play a role in terms of how one actually treats these species.
I must admit, I rather enjoyed the article because, of course, it's an overseas project that I was reading up on, and they had imported Boer Bokke to sort out the issue. I thought, oh, here we go. Even our goats have got some use. Reduction in land use, Chris. If I look at here locally, we've got that bankrupt bush, the bankrupt bos, which is a terrible creature that takes the land out completely. You can't seemingly use it for any form of grazing or what have you. What sort of land use have we lost in South Africa, and are we actually making any gains?
Sure, I couldn't give you the stats on the extent to which we've lost usable land, but I mean, the Karoo we know is much less productive in terms of sheep farming now than it was 100 years ago, and there's basic reasons for that. We know that our grasslands, especially the mistbelt grasslands, have been changed to a large degree with forestry and poor or uninformed grazing practices in the past, or overstocking. There are all sorts of things that create stress in the environment, which then renders them vulnerable to invasion. So, yeah, I mean, land use and good land use practice is actually the best preventative to alien invasion, and it is important for land users and people that are making a living off the landscape in one way or another to actually be really careful about what land use practice they apply, considering not only what the bank manager or whoever else is driving the process might want out of it. It's actually the consequences that one needs to be really careful of. We can't carry on stealing from our grandchildren.
In our own gardens, do we sort of say, okay, it's one category 1 plant or one category 1 tree, doesn't really matter, or does it?
I think collectively it certainly does matter. So as a citizen of the country, it's important that that we all understand the threat that these alien plants do actually bring. And I mean, there's this ongoing battle. It'll be in all the cities, but in Cape Town, I know where the national park's actually working on Table Mountain National Park. There's this continual friction between the residents adjacent to the park and the park people around. Why do those pines have to go, or those gum trees, or those other category 1 and 2 species? Because we get used to, and we've got a Eurocentric view, and we've been programmed to see these things as beautiful without understanding the impact that they may have on the fabric of our lifestyles. So I think awareness is a huge part of this whole problem. Yeah. And the sooner people understand that not all exotic trees are invaders, but the ones that are really need to be dealt with.
Sure. Chris, a question here on the SMS line asking about, and I get a sense you might have a caveat in your answer, how to eradicate black wattle. Eugene says, I cut them low, spray with herbicide, a few months later sprout again. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the wattle is a particularly difficult customer, the black wattle. There are 3 kinds of wattle, 3 species that come from similar areas in Western Australia. Mm-hmm. So sometimes there are herbicides registered for specific ones. The green and black wattle usually are treated as one species or treated as one type of alien, but silver wattle sometimes may require a different herbicide, just make sure your herbicide is actually registered for that species, number one. Number two, the cutting with there's a whole lot of requirements that you will read in the label, and that's one of the things that is useful about this guide, which would be useful for users wider in the Cape Floral region, is all the processes that you need to put in place to ensure that your herbicide is in fact effective. So, there's the sunlight that can break down the herbicide over time, leaving the herbicide in spray pumps overnight or over a certain period of time. The actual operator properly trained and applying the herbicide correctly. Those could all be possible factors which contribute to a lack of success. And then, of course, actual cutting and treating those actual protocols that you're treating, your controlling team need to follow are critically important. And all of those are, in fact, not necessarily described in detail in the guideline, but we have provided links to certain herbicide guidelines, which will then give the detail required there. So I'm not sure of what other possibilities there could be, but those are a list that your listener could potentially look at.
All right, fantastic stuff. Gentlemen, that is all the time we have for this discussion, but thank you so much for your time this morning, Chris. I really appreciate your insights.
Excellent. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Will do. That's Chris Martins. He's co-author of the Practical Guide to Managing Invasive Alien Plants, and of course he is a member of the fynbos Trust.